Hello everyone and welcome. We're going to play around now with another set of rules of thumb, and that is for the approximation of an initial size for steel columns. I've reproduced for you on the screen what I found on Appendix B of your textbook, and what I've done is I'm showing here the what is actually fully represented in Appendix B. And then I've also converted it to metric for your purposes. And basically what it says in your textbook is, when it comes to approximating the size of steel columns is this. Basically, it says that once you're able to figure out the maximum area that a certain column can support, then depending on where that area falls, and that's the tributary area that that column supports, okay? And then you find the corresponding size. And it's exactly the same for metric, okay? So I figured the best way to do this is simply by doing it, right? We'll do an example together to see what I mean. So let's go. Let's say we have this example right here. I took it straight out of your textbook. I think it's figure 19.5. We're going to assume that we have this steel structure and there are bays that go in the east-west direction. And we'll do this example in imperial units first. Let's assume that the east-west bays are 30 feet apart. Okay, that's the span of the east-west bays. And then let's assume that the north-south bays, their width is, I'll pick something that I had, super simple, 26.5 feet. Just like this, okay? So the whole idea, as you know, when it comes to tributary widths, is that a column, and for now we're looking at interior columns, it supports an area that is the same as the area bound by one bay in one direction and one bay in the other direction. So if we have that the east-west bays, that is these bays right here, are 30 feet, and the north-south bays, that is these bays right here, are 26.5 feet, so then what we get from that is that any interior column supports an area that is bound by the same dimensions, right? This area here is going to be 30 feet in this direction and is going to be 26.5 feet in this direction, because you always find the tributary area of an interior column going halfway north-south between itself and the next columns, and halfway east-west between itself, the column, and all the two columns on either side. So if we're able to figure out what this area here is, then we're able to figure out the tributary width for 1 story's worth. So if we do 30 feet times 26.5 feet, we get 95 square feet. Okay? Now, let's assume we're doing the column at ground level. And let's assume that this building, I've completely made it up, is 5 stories high. Okay? So that means that any interior ground column, say like this one here, is supporting 795 square feet times 5 stories worth of it. When we do 795 times 5, we get 3,975. Just going to double check, that's what I get. Okay. So now that we know what the tributary width for the whole area that ground column is supporting, because it's supporting 5 stories above it, then what we would do is then go back to our table right here, and we find the closest in the imperial that we have to that area. So in our case, the area that we calculated was 3,975 square feet, right? Because we have to match these units right here. So at 3,975, we have to go here, right? That's the largest area that is just above what we're looking at. And if we have this then, right here, then that means this is the dimension that we have to go for. So this is 12 by 12. And what it refers to is the depth of your W section and the width of the flange of your W section, like this. 12 inches by 12 inches. Okay? So that would be identified as a W12 in imperial units. Now let's redo all of this, but let's use metric units so we can play around using this table right here. Okay? So let's move down, repeat this question, but let's use metric units. So let's pretend that the east-west bays are spaced at 9,144 millimeters. And I'm going to convert it to meters because it makes it easier to calculate the areas. Like this. And the north-south bays are spaced at 8,077 millimeters. Or 8.077 meters. When I calculate the area of 1 story worth of tributary width, I do that by multiplying this number times that number in millimeters squared, or this number times that number in meters squared. So when I do it in meters squared, because it'll help us figure it out in the table, I get 9.144 meters times 8.077 meters. That gives me 73.9 meters squared. And if I'm assuming that this too has 5 stories for the column I'm looking at, any interior column, I get a total tributary width of 369.5 meters squared. Okay? So now I have to go back to the tables right here, where I'm going to find the closest thing to an area of 369.5 square meters. And the closest one that I can find is right here. This one won't work, it's too small. And if I use this one, then I have to go and use this one. So that tells me then that the column, if it's going to be a W section, must have a depth and a width, so a flange width, that has to be at least 305 by 305 millimeters. How do I find a size like that? Well, that's where, if you remember, Web Civil comes into play. You learned about Web Civil from your working drawings professor. It's also linked for you on our Brightspace page. If you go to webcivil.com, you can find a link to finding sizes, the geometry of W sections. Okay? So that's how you approximate the size of either a metric or an imperial W section steel column using what's provided for you in Appendix B. That's for interior columns. What about for exterior columns? Well, for exterior columns, so let's say if we're looking at, say, one of these columns right here, the process is exactly the same, okay? Exterior columns take a smaller tributary width, but that sometimes is made up by the fact that they have to support the exterior finish, right? The veneer, whatever that is, of the building, which interior columns typically don't. So just do it the same way. You'll get something that's a bit bigger than what it needs to be, but that's okay. The last thing that I want to point out, as usual, is this is more of a US type measurement, so that means that sometimes maybe it does not include snow effects that come down from a roof. Okay? But this is perfectly fine for your purposes and coming up with an approximate size for interior and exterior columns. Thank you so much for your time. Take care and have a lovely day.